But I would like to work with your Oh, master. But the job offer. Are you like from the area? I was like all of this for like years. All right, but I will hold it up and put it on. Ben, I think you're in the wrong group. So I am so happy is supposed to be presenting this, and his visa was rejected, and he was unable to travel as of about 48 hours ago. So I'm presenting for him and not. Okay. Because also we're Canadian conference. Yeah. Okay, I will put your name in. Yeah, sorry. Well, and I mean your slides. My slide number. Let's see, where did my slide number 2 is. This is Abby, who's supposed to be presenting it, and he would be a great PhD candidate for any of it. So, I mean, I'm gonna try to do what I can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bizarre.
Ridiculous political vision. Perfect. Yeah, sorry for that. You were both international. Just it doesn't matter. Frameworks, whatever I can actually.
Oh, please, yes.
Do you want me to rename it?
It's up to you. It's already open, so
Yeah.
we'll be fine.
E aí eu discuti com o pessoal do BNDES e a primeira vez para a água. E não tinha que colocar, só que está tá bom. E aí eu falei,
Yeah. Well, you almost
Eu trabalhei desde a época quando era jovem, já trabalhava na presidência do grupo de trabalho, trabalhei no a maioria das coisas relacionadas a anos que eu escrevi. A primeira coisa que eu perguntei, quando você vive na parede, eu fui na incrível.
Oh, no, yes. I think we copied your thing. But we should be okay. Yeah. Okay, we'll get started. This is Redbud, and you're in the sanitation session. First up is Gabrielle Marega from the University of Toronto. And she is going to tell us about expanding sanitary sewer infrastructure amidst uncertain rates of urbanization and climate change. Gabrielle.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Gabrielle. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Toronto. And today, I'm going to talk about sanitary sewers, specifically how urbanization, climate change, and most importantly, how stormwater can impact the system. Achieving universal access to water and sanitation and the influence of climate change will be a defining challenge of the SDG period. Furthermore, earlier this year, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change stated that key infrastructure systems, including sanitation, will be incredibly vulnerable if design standards do not account for climate conditions. With that in mind, I went back to the literature to look how people are exploring sanitation and climate change. I found a quote from the Climate Resilient Urban Sanitation from last year's that summarizes my research. And that is that there's only sparse research and evidence on the impacts of climate change on sanitation infrastructure service. Therefore, a limited discussion of effective approaches for adaptation. So the objective of my study was to study how climate change could impact sanitation, but not the whole sanitation chain. I'm only focused on sanitary sewers. So sanitary sewers are designed to collect and transport sewage. They are also called separate systems because we have two different systems. One just to collect sewage, like I said, and we have another infrastructure to collect stormwater. Their infrastructures, they have a long life expectancy. They can range for a couple of decades, but we do have some operational sewers that are built 100 years ago. And during this entire lifetime, the sewers needs to perform well. So for doing that, we estimated we estimate the load that the system will experience in the end of its lifetime. However, sanitary sewers can have some problems and complications. One of them is the stormwater. Stormwater can get into my system due to a number of reasons. One of them, illustrating this photo, is in the property size or the household level. Here, instead of the drain roof, instead of being connected to the storm system, it can be connected illegally or wrongly to the sewage system. In Canada, it was estimated 70% of the whole stormwater that get into the system is at the household connection, hence the one illustrating this photo. If we do have stormwater getting to my sanitary sewers, we can have a problem called sanitary sewer overflow. They can have economical and health hazards. The Environmental Protection Agency estimated between 25 to 75,000 of sanitary sewers overflow occur per year here in the US. We don't have data to estimate how the problem is in the Global South, but we can anticipate that this also could be a challenge. However, the expansion of sanitary sewers in these countries also have a few other challenges that we have to take into consideration. We do have high rates of urbanization. We have a high level of informality. We do have poverty and social inequality. And also, an important thing, we have a changing climate that can range for increasing droughts, but also for extreme weather events and flooding. So with all that in mind, the objective of my study was to understand how these uncertainties due to climate change, stormwater, and urbanization could impact my system. And for doing that, we created a sanitary sewer model. This model is a mathematical and hydraulic representation of the system, and we built in a way that's is simple and is just one pipe. We represent the entire network as one pipe. And the whole goal of building this model was to understand and provide high level of insights, what's happening in the system, and how these three uncertainties could impact my system. So as an input of the model, we have the uncertainties that range urbanization, climate change, and stormwater. As an output, I evaluate the flow rate. So we do have three different groups for uncertainties: urbanization, climate change, and stormwater. Both for the first two groups, both urbanization and climate change, I look in literature how other people are exploring how they're going to be treated, especially in the water context. So we do have to consider the population growth rate, how much water people are consuming, so how much sewage they are producing per capita, and also how much the level of impervious surface. For climate change effects here, I'm only considering the increase of intensity of rainfall events. And the third group of uncertainty is one particularity of the study that I call the stormwater effects. Like I said, some amount of stormwater can get into my system, but this is highly uncertain. And we want us to quantify how much water can get into our system. For doing that, we create a variable that we call F-storm. That's basically a ratio. It's a simple ratio that varies from 0 to 1. If this variable is equal to 0, it behaves as a perfect sanitary sewer, so no stormwater is being collected. However, if it's equal to 1, it's going to collect all sewage and all the possible runoff, behaving as a combined sewer. To evaluate how this model is performing, we have two different flow rates. The first one is the flow rate that we're estimating using design guidelines. It's a deterministically load. However, our future can be uncertain, and we can have a bunch of range of scenarios of how the future will look like. So in this other flow rate, the demand flow, I'm capturing how the future could look like, but I'm only using two different scenarios, the stream scenarios, the minimum flow and the maximum flow. To assess how the model is performing, I applied to a case study in Brazil. I am applying the case study in Brazil because Brazil is investing in building sanitary sewers. The federal government goal is the new federal government goal is to provide 90% of sanitary sewer coverage by 2033. Today is around 54%. So it means that 100 million people will be served by sanitary sewers in the next decade. I applied to 3 different cities with 3 different socioeconomic and climate regimes in the country. One located in the Amazon basin at Manaus, another one in the south, called Curitiba, and another one in the northeast, that's also the 16th most vulnerable city to climate change. To see our results, I performed a one-way sensitivity analysis, and we visualized them as a tornado plot. I'm going to run through this plot now. In the left axis, we have each of uncertainties that I range perturbed one at a time. In the y-axis, we have this ratio or the performance metric. If this ratio is equal to y, that means that the load that we're estimating using design guidelines is exactly how the future will look like. However, I'm trying to stress my system with the minimum and the maximum range of uncertainty. So we can see in this right side, the dark blue, is that if we have the maximum range of uncertainty, we can potentially have a sanitary sewer overflow, which means that the system is under design. If in this right side with the gray, the light gray blue, it means that our system is under design. As we can see here, the fraction of stormwater that get into my system is the most sensitive variable. And the reason for that is mostly because that's the variable that I have the widest range of uncertainty. When I apply for the other two cities that I analyzed in Brazil, the same pattern was observed. Here we can see that the fraction of stormwater, regardless, they do have a different climate regime, these three cities, is also the most relevant uncertainty. Like I said, this reason is because the uncertainty in the fraction of stormwater is the highest one. Like I said in the beginning, we do know that there is a problem here in North America of how much stormwater they're getting to my system. But this is an unknown value. We don't know how to quantify it. So what we did, we made key assumptions and we find this value of F storm using design guidelines. Each country has different design lines and can accommodate some sort of stormwater into the system. However, the range of how much stormwater, how this fraction is, varies from different countries. So applying our model in 3 different guidelines, I use Brazilian guidelines, South Africa, and Toronto's design guidelines, the range of this parameter that can vary from 0 to 1 is between 0.01% to 0.6%. So as a conclusion, is climate change the biggest challenge during the expansion of sanitary sewers? Our model shows that no, but the fraction of stormwater that get into my system is the most relevant and critical element. It is 2.1 times more significant than the other 4 uncertainties and 2.3 times more significant than climate change. If, and this is a big if, all the other variables are met, climate change will increase the flow rate in the end of the infrastructure lifetime by 5 to 6%. And as a big takeaway is that reducing this amount of stormwater that is collected in the system also mitigates climate change. Thank you very much. I'm open to any questions.
Questions for you?
Hi, I'm Paul Hicks from Catholic Relief Services. So it's interesting that the climate change, effect of climate change would be only 5 to 6%. So just wondering what is it that you're calculating or assuming on climate change? Is it, if it's just storm events like the 50 to 100-year storm events, those would seem to have a really big impact on how much storm water or how much excessive water gets into the sanitation system.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see that it's only 5 or 6%.
Exactly. What we are doing is exactly that. When we assume that the other variables, for example, the fraction of stormwater that get into my system is exactly what the design standards are projecting, the effect of climate change, even considering an increase of 200% of the intensity of rainfall, is only 6% in the end of my flow rate. However, if the fraction of stormwater is not what is projecting in the design guidelines, then the climate change will increase intensity and is going to left the system more vulnerable.
Other questions?
Yes. Yes, we can. I'm. Yes. Exactly. There's a few ways that stormwater can get into my system. This one that I'm illustrating the photo is estimated to be the most relevant one, is on the lot level. A household has to have, when we are talking about separate systems, we have two different infrastructure. One that's going to be collecting all the stormwater, like the drainage part of the infrastructure is going to be connected in the drainage or the stormwater infrastructure. And we have another pipeline in the household level that can get into my sanitary sewers. In a perfect world, they're supposed to be separate. Like if, yeah, that's what's supposed to happen. And if it doesn't happen, what happens is that law enforcement can force them to separate the lines. That's not, like, I don't know exactly other places because I didn't find any numbers, but in Canada, that's a problem. And 70% of all the water that goes into the system is this, in this case. So what they do right now is they do have regulations. So they have law enforcement. They go, they find a connection. There are different methods on how to find them, and they issue a fine for the household. And then the household have a few months or something to correct this connection. Otherwise, they're getting a fine. That's how it happens. So one way, like one way that I went to the presentation, or like the takeaway also to be, is that when we're like doing our sanitary sewer, it is important that we do this enforcement right now, constructing it. We need to separate it as in the building system. Otherwise, we're going to have a really big issue. Did I solve it? Sorry.
Okay, and do you calibrate the model using, I don't know, age and material of the pipe? So
No, that's another uncertainty that I didn't consider. Like, yeah, there's a bunch of uncertainties, and I try to reduce as many uncertainties as possible. But yeah, age of the pipe is also going to be an uncertainty that going to increase stormwater in the future as well.
Perfect. Let's thank Gabriel. Okay, next up, we have Ben Tidwell from World Vision, and he's going to tell us about accelerating sustainability in wash services through business centers in Ethiopia. Ben?
Sure, thanks. Let me start out just by apologizing. I am not, in fact, Abiy Tefesa. I wish that he were here and his visa was denied, so I'm presenting on his behalf, but I'm going to use the start of the presentation to say he was a terrific project lead on this, and if anybody's looking for PhD candidates, should be top of your list. I'll put his picture back up at the end so you can all remember that. It's the main output here. But I want to talk just a little bit about WASH business centers, which are a market-based approach used in Ethiopia, piloted by our World Vision office there. So just as a little bit of background, oh, the Mac to PC jump did not happen well. So as many of you probably know, plenty of challenges with sanitation and hygiene in Ethiopia, very low rates of safely managed and sanitation, basic hygiene, all kinds of challenges in the market environment there with imports, exports, foreign currency, that sort of thing. So WASH business centers were essentially started to be a one-stop shop. They are wholesale center to bring in appropriate product supply. You can see a photo there of some of the hand washing stations and liquid soap and various products that are developed. They also have retail and even service delivery components. They're often toilets and other things you can use on site, both to demonstrate products and honestly just to have access to wash services. They were piloted starting in 2017, and they've grown from 4 to 41 active centers as of 22. And so you can, as you see there, about 12,000 latrine slabs sold, and about 88,000 total different households that have made a purchase so far. So really, as we've probably some of you have been in sessions where there's been a lot of discussion about like the Transform Wash project in Ethiopia and a lot of market-based approaches. This was much more on the supply side, trying to get the supply of appropriate products and the ability to manufacture locally into low population density, poor rural areas. So the key questions of this assessment really were, what are the sanitation hygiene gaps in these areas? So some of these centers have been in place for, between 1 and 5 years. Sales have been made, people have learned about them. So what gaps remain? Obviously, they've not quite closed all the gaps in that time. And to what degree are those gaps due to a lack of awareness or need for better marketing, distance to these centers? How close to households do we need to place these so that people can regularly access these products? What kind of affordability, willingness to pay concerns are there? So basically, how do we get from where we are now to the kind of universal coverage, area-wide coverage that we'd all like to see? So this was essentially a cross-sectional survey. It's the beginning of a longer-term longitudinal evaluation, but the data here is from a cross-sectional survey of 6 wash business centers. Wish I could live just delete that picture because I don't know what's happening with the text on the PC. About 250 households around each of the 6 wash business centers selected just by looking at GPS coordinates and selecting clusters of households based on some satellite imagery. There was essentially a household survey followed by a demand experiment with vouchers. So looking at randomly allocated vouchers for 10, 30, or 50% subsidy separately for an improved slab. So this is a cement slab with Sato pan and an improved hand washing station. So I should also mention there are water system components for maintenance of water points that are provided by these centers, but they weren't a part of the actual evaluation that we conducted here. The results I'll be printing. So just to put in perspective some of the results that are forthcoming. So mean monthly income per household in these areas is about 10 USD compared to a national mean of about $32. So very poor rural areas. About 19% open defecation. So 81% had any kind of toilet, but only 11% improved sanitation. Again, a little bit higher than the national average of 7%, but quite low. Only about 12% with a place for hand washing. And about 7% with soap and water, about 6% total basic hand washing access. So our first question was about how, these centers have been in these communities now for, again, between 1 to 4 years. How many people in these communities have heard about them? They're not intensively marketing door to door. They're kind of supply side first. And so essentially what we saw that only about a third of those in these communities within 5 kilometers of these wash business centers had heard of them. So again, this is not nothing. So there has been some exposure here. In a lot of settings, we found almost no sales coming through retail sales outlets without a lot of community activation. But certainly there's still a large gap here. And of those who had heard, about half had made a purchase of some kind, and we have some more detailed statistics about that coming as well. So certainly a large awareness gap and need for a lot of demand activation, as we've heard in other settings. Okay, but among those who had heard and had made purchases, what kind of impacts do we see? Well, first we had, before the voucher experiment, just some suggestive data. We wanted to know, have those who have heard about these, made purchases, how does that compare to those who haven't? Again, this is not, there's no causal claim being made on this slide. Let me be very clear. There's all kinds of issues here, but at least something that made us think we should try a bit of a voucher trial to see what kind of demand there was. Essentially that those who have heard of these are more likely to have any toilet and much more likely to have an improved toilet. Again, keeping in mind that these numbers in an absolute scale are quite low, at least for improved toilets, but relative to baseline, a business that reached 12% of the population in a few years would probably be happy in most contexts. So the voucher trial, I'll put up the results of that. So I should note the vouchers were given with a 3-month time horizon to redeem the vouchers. And we have here reported slab purchase on the left, hand washing on the right, and the vouchers from 10 to 50% discounts. So the first thing you'll probably notice, as in most willingness to pay slides, is that it didn't turn out that everyone bought a toilet just because they were 50% off. There's plenty of problems with cash flow, other priorities, things like that. And so the point of this slide is certainly not, if we just subsidize everything 50%, it will be solved in a few months. However, given the very low baseline rates of sanitation, seeing a 5 percentage point increase in improved sanitation in a few months is a pretty noticeable improvement. And so, if we look here at between 3 and 5%, for slab purchase, between 3 and 7% for hand washing station, these are not negligible impacts. And again, the interpretation of this I would have is, what is the impact of moving to marketing? If we're talking about a 10% voucher, the idea behind the 10% voucher was to give some encouragement to purchase soon so that we could understand latent demand, but certainly not making or breaking the difference in ability to afford or not. And some additional uptake. So certainly the need to continue to test marketing messages and subsidies over a longer period of time. But the main takeaway being, there is certainly some latent willingness to pay and some latent interest in these that's not being met currently in many contexts in Ethiopia. So the last question we had is, what is the impact of these changes on quality of life, not just on having a slab, which seems somewhat arbitrary when, if described anywhere other than a WASH conference, but what is the impact of these different levels of sanitation? And so we used a measure called sanitation related quality of life. That's a method being developed out of London School of Hygiene that's essentially for rapidly assessing kind of the entirety of the benefits, not just health, but safety, convenience, privacy, that sort of thing associated with sanitation. And so there are 5 total components you can see along the bottom: disgust, health, privacy, shame, and safety. And then a total aggregation. There are user-derived weights that will tell you which of these are most important. And I can say that health was bottom of the list. Avoiding disgust and privacy were the top 2, and so relevant for some marketing, some marketers in the room. We see here open defecation has about a 33% on average. Keep in mind that this is describing their current situation as open defecation, and a 0 would be the worst possible sanitation you could imagine. So I would say a 0 would probably be me having to defecate in the middle of this room right now while all of you videoed. So, that's not the situation that most people find themselves, even if they're having to practice open defecation. But you'll notice even going open defecation to an unimproved toilet has a very substantial benefit to folks. And you can interpret, I suppose, the jump from unimproved to improved in a couple of ways. You could either interpret this as, well, improved is just giving kind of a small relative bump, so why are we focusing on it? Or you could say, well, it's closing about half the gap between an unimproved toilet and the theoretical perfect type of sanitation. And so while there's arguments in terms of public health, things like that, there are still strong arguments for both promoting, unimproved sanitation as an end to open defecation, and of course for continuing to improve sanitation, achieving basic and safely managed sanitation, like many of us in the room are moving towards. So conclusions from this. Just the PC is slaying me today. First of all, certainly a need to track longer-term sales and performance, voucher redemption rates over longer time horizons. Really, this trial was to say, is there some latent demand? What is the possibility of uptake in a short time horizon? And of course, role of financing. Even I think if we give people more than 3 months, it's not going to make those numbers go from 3% to 80% uptake or anything like that. But a couple of more important takeaways that are maybe more useful, though you can only see half of the third one. One is that I think it's really important to assess context and what consumers really want. We talk about improved sanitation, as basic sanitation, safely managed sanitation, improved technologies, and those are something that people seem to want, but that is definitely not the sum total of their demand. So there's plenty of things that we should think about in marketing that might drive higher rates of uptake. And unfortunately, the last, which is cut off, but maybe the most important, I think, is often we report results in terms of, and there were 1,000 toilets sold or 5,000 toilets sold, some raw numbers, which are really important business metrics, but they don't really get at the underlying question of, but how close does that get us to area-wide coverage? If we sell 1,000 toilets to the 10% of the wealthiest, and we extend that farther and farther, and maybe we get to 80%, are we leaving behind the 20% that are the poorest? And I think in our performance metrics and tracking, we need to really take better consideration of those. So with that, I will leave you again with a reminder of the person I wish was here to present. We had a slightly better immigration system, and happy to take any questions or defer to our WASH director from Ethiopia here as well. who's also got a like sort of operational manual that goes on to describe in more workings the actual implementation of these, if anybody's interested. Thanks.
Questions for Ben?
All right. Sure.
I don't know if that's from the beginning, so you are providing vouchers for people to buy that, sanitation improvement, is that correct?
Yeah, so a voucher trial. So essentially trying to understand what's the demand curve for these various products.
So we're gonna have a secondary market, so people, they didn't want that, so they exchange that for money, because smaller money, so it's not a secondary market for that.
So I mean, so these vouchers, so I suppose I don't know the answer to that question in total. They were assigned to a family so that a certain family and household ID could redeem them. You know, the ability of people to potentially, you know, sell those, something like that. I mean, it certainly could have happened. You know, we'd have to check on that a little bit, but I think that, yeah, because of the sort of pairing it to a household, it would have been relatively limited. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So these are placed in World Vision areas in Ethiopia, which generally speaking are in rural, not like the, you know, like within Awarida or you know, the areas that their catchment is in. You know, they'll be on a road in sort of a market in an area. Now they're, you know, their catchment is quite rural. Many people wouldn't have road access to actually get there. But we did, one of the things we asked was how often people within that 5-kilometer area found themselves like within a kilometer of the Wash Business Center, and it was almost universal. And so we didn't find any drop off in demand, voucher redemption, anything like having heard of the business center within a 5-kilometer catchment. So at least that part was, yeah, indicative that we didn't need to have more than that. We did also find though that they tended to put some of their products, especially liquid soap, into smaller retail outlets that would be closer to this. So even though we didn't encourage them to do that, you know, entrepreneurs did what entrepreneurs do and found ways to increase their sales. So that was something that, you know, is now a part of the system, right? That they figured out. So.
You have time for maybe to question that for that, you know, the reason why we are, you know, much business center is not basically just trying to find something to meet the different service. So you are doing usually the department of the market, you are telling me for the but for the wash business, the product is very different. Even the communities, they don't have any reality. So we those four in what we center by conducting the format about the location, the product type, the target price, and the promotion. So it's after that we are still up to make it in a process. So in every what is necessary attachment, there is a formatting that should be contacted to realize the product type, the promotion that's appropriate, and including also the location that you are studying. So if you have interest, you can see the poster, how our wash business centers are doing this all over the country.
Is there any that you know
yeah.
You know, that's why we actually came up with that manual. You know, we do have what we did, all over the country. So from what we have been told that we are different practices. So we create study this manual, the people that making the proper awareness, you know, in our area. This actually manual was developed in line with the research that was actually contacted by that guy. So, if you are really interested, I can give you this one, you can find, the different stakeholders who actually have stake in this business. Also, the different business, approach processes that we have been actually using. So this can be, one manual that can be more inside for us in the center and the market. So anyone who has interested,
Yes, please direct all your other questions to Amare, who will know much more than I do about everything other than the actual research. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Good. And for the final talk this evening, we have Troy Barker from UNC Chapel Hill, and he'll tell us about building public toilets has reduced enteric pathogen hazards in San Francisco, but potential risks remain. Troy?
Hey everyone, my name is Troy Barker. I am a recently graduated UNC MPH student, and I'm presenting on on microbial hazards from discarded human and animal feces in San Francisco, California. A little bit of background. So nearly 1 million people in the United States lack access to basic sanitation, and over 600,000 cannot consistently access basic water infrastructure. And that's mainly affecting those who are lacking stable housing. 130,000 people are experiencing homelessness in California, and people experiencing homelessness are disproportionately unsheltered in California compared to the rest of the United States. Consistent access to sanitation and soap and water for hand washing is necessary to prevent the spread of enteric pathogens. And specifically in San Francisco, there are not enough public toilets to meet demand, leading to open defecation and allowing uncontained fecal waste to accumulate, creating opportunities for exposure to enteric pathogens. So to address fecal contamination on the streets of San Francisco, the Department of Public Works created a well-known 311 system for reporting feces in public spaces. They also implemented the Pit Stop program in 2014, seen here, aimed at reducing open defecation by installing public toilets in areas of high need, which also include animal waste bags and bins. And a recent impact assessment of the program by Amato et al. Estimated that the installation of public latrines in San Francisco reduced 311 reports of fecal waste on the street by a mean of 12.47 stools per week within 500 meters or walking distance of newly installed pit stop locations in the 6 months following installation compared to pre-intervention. The Tenderloin neighborhood experienced the greatest reduction and had the highest number of new public toilets installed. Tenderloin and Soma have the highest count of people experiencing homelessness and of 311 reports in the study. These interventions may affect exposures to enteric pathogen hazards to the public, including among people experiencing homelessness who likely bear the greatest risks. So in this study, we sought to estimate the degree to which pit stop interventions may have reduced enteric pathogens in the immediate environment surrounding new toilet facilities. To do this, we conducted a systematic survey of discarded feces in a predefined area. We determined whether each fecal sample was of human or non-human origin. We quantified a range of enteric pathogens in recovered fecal samples using molecular methods, and we used the intervention attributable reduction in observed feces from 311 reports to estimate the reduction of enteric pathogens we detected. So I'll go into our methods. First, we identified open defecation hotspots using 311 reports in August 2020, selecting the Tenderloin and Soma for sampling. We also matched observed feces with 311 reports in the field to verify 311 data reliably indicated instances of fecal waste. We prioritized 20 blocks for collection generated a perimeter around those 20 blocks, and collected specimens on 4 Wednesday mornings in September and October of 2020 before street cleaning began. Samples were collected into biohazard bags and stored in a cooler with ice packs immediately, then stored at -20 Celsius within 4 hours of collection. So we did some molecular work here. We extracted nucleic acids from 100 milligrams of each stool using a previously validated pre-treatment step and the Chi-AMP96 virus QIAcube HT kit. We then measured the double-stranded DNA concentration of extracted nucleic acids for each sample using a qubit 4 fluorometer. We determined whether stools were presumptively human in origin by testing samples for human mitochondrial DNA via digital PCR, and normalized mtDNA gene copy estimates to the qubit double-stranded DNA results and compared those values to literature values. We developed and used custom TACMan array cards, or TAC, using published primer and probe sequences to test for a range of enteric bacteria, viruses, protozoa, and helminths. We analyzed nucleic acids via TAC on the QuantStudio 7, generating real-time qPCR curves for each target and sample. We visually compared exponential curves with positive control plots, manually set thresholds to the point of inflection, and considered targets amplifying at or below 35 cycles to be positive. We reran samples that did not amplify positive controls as expected at a 1:10 dilution and excluded samples that didn't then amplify from our analysis. Using standard curves, we transform CQ values into gene copy concentrations per gram of feces. So here's an illustration of our stochastic model. We estimated the annual number of pathogens diverted from the environment attributable to the pit stop intervention program using RStudio software. We transformed the gene copies into pathogen counts using published values for gene copies per organism. We then use maximum likelihood estimation to fit distributions to the number of pathogens per gram of stool and fecal samples, generating a mean and standard deviation. We modeled 12 stools per week based on the Amato et al. Paper that were diverted from the environment due to each new toilet facility across 52 weeks. Using a Monte Carlo simulation, we applied a binomial distribution to estimate whether each of the 12 stools simulated contained a given pathogen. If that fecal sample was simulated to contain a pathogen, we estimated the number of pathogens present from the corresponding MLE-generated distribution and median daily mass of stool produced by an adult, which is roughly 106 grams. For pathogens detected only once, we use the number of pathogens per gram of stool for the single stool and the average MLE standard deviation from plurally detected pathogens. We repeated this process 52 times to simulate pathogens reduced over a year, so 52 weeks. We then summed the number of estimated pathogens across that entire year to estimate the number of pathogens diverted annually, repeating the process 1,000 times to generate 95% confidence intervals. So I have these graphs of our results. We tested 60 stool samples, but excluded one that didn't amplify positive controls, leaving us 59 samples for analysis. As you can see, 30 stools, or roughly half of our samples, contained 1 or more tested pathogens. 21 contained 2 or more, 8 contained 3 or more, and 1 sample contained 5 pathogens. The graph on the right shows the pathogens we detected. Presumptively human samples are in dark blue and animal samples are in light blue. Notably, 4 out of 5 samples we tested were not human in origin. Pathogen profiles differed between human and animal samples. Atypical enteropathogenic E. coli, or EPEC, was by far the most commonly detected pathogen, followed by typical EPEC and Acanthamoeba, Cryptosporidium, and Giardia. Of those 5 most commonly detected pathogens, only atypical EPEC and Acanthamoeba were found in any human stools. Pathogens found only in human stools include H. pylori, Shigella, P. shigelloides, and Yersinia intercolitica. Pathogens found only in animal stools include typical EPEC, Salmonella, norovirus, Giardia, Cryptosporidium, Balantidium coli, and Trichuris. Here are the results from our model. We created two scenarios in our model, one in which all fecal waste that was reduced due to pit stop was of human origin, and one in which human and animal stools were equally likely to be reduced. Assuming only human stools were reduced, we calculated that each new public toilet prevented the release of 10 to the 14th atypical EPEC and enteroaggregative E. coli, 10 to the 12th blastocystis, 10 to the 10th Yersinia intercolitica, 10 to the 9th H. pylori and P. shigaloides, 10 to the 8th enterotoxigenic E. coli and Shigella, and 10 to the 6th acanthamoeba. The pit stop intervention also includes bags and trash bins for disposing of animal waste, so potentially animal waste was reduced as well. And results from that mixed scenario of our model are on the right, where we see a similar range of reductions for a different pathogen profile. We also performed microscopy on our single helminth positive sample. We only perform microscopy on samples positive for helminths, so we just have this one result, but we identified 3 different species of helminth ova, which are common in the canines in this sample, confirming our Trichuris result for this sample. So we have a few assumptions and limitations in the study. We treated non-detects as true zeros, although they may have been just below our limit of detection. We fit our gene copy data to a log normal distribution, and we also assumed stool samples were representative of those reduced by the pit stop intervention. In one scenario, we assumed all stools removed were human, and in the second scenario, that human and animal stools were removed in equal proportions. The selection of pathogen targets for TAC was a priority to represent a subset of enteric pathogens of public health importance. We found Toxicara and canine hookworm through microscopy incidentally, and future studies should consider whether other zoonoses might be present on the streets. Crucially, the frequency of detection of pathogens in these stool samples does not represent the prevalence of infection in any population. Multiple stool samples in the study might have been from the same individual, and estimates were based on a limited number of samples. We detected pathogen-associated nucleic acids, which do not indicate viability or infectivity. Finally, we cannot link the reduction of fecal hazards to reduce exposure to pathogens. In conclusion, approximately half our samples were positive for at least one enteric pathogen, which may pose infection risks, especially to people experiencing homelessness. We also found that pit stop toilets likely reduced the number of pathogens within 500 meters or walking distance. 4 out of 5 fecal samples tested likely did not come from humans, and pathogen profiles were different between human and animal stools, but pathogens found in animal stools can still pose risk to humans. We believe that San Francisco deserves credit for its proactive efforts, which are not inexpensive and can be politically contentious as cities grapple with the homelessness crisis. We should consider a One Health perspective when addressing waste, as a wide range of pathogens with zoonotic potential may be present. However, the construction of publicly accessible, safe toilets is a common sense approach to reducing enteric pathogen hazards in cities. And the primary reason to invest in such facilities is that they are the humane thing to do. Clean water and sanitation are internationally recognized human rights, biological necessities, and essential to living a dignified life. Thank you to everyone who helped out with this presentation, and I'm open to any questions.
Quite a mic drop at the end. Questions for Troy?
Yeah, hi, Kellogg Schwab, Johns Hopkins. One, thanks for doing the work, and it's sad that we have to in a relatively high income country in there. The question I had actually is technical. So if you're going out and looking for fecal material, and our previous speaker says, yeah, 0 is when I am pooping and he's taking a picture of me pooping while we're doing this. No offense to you. Was there an active approach to saying in homeless situations, people usually gravitate towards areas to defecate that might not be the same as just seeing fecal material on the street? So in that setup, would the next steps be where asking at the community level, where are people defecating where you might have a higher burden specifically? I mean, there's high numbers, right? 10 to the 12th and all that, clearly not uniform. So where do we go next? I mean, it's fairly sophisticated searching. And the last part of that is there's a lot of things that public toilets do besides just allow homeless people to defecate in there. And it's not a negative approach to do this in our sanitation. And it could be a showcase for decentralized systems that we can showcase as ways that are waterless or other approaches in there. Was that ever considered or could it be considered?
Sorry, could you explain what you mean by waterless approaches?
Yeah, all right. So let's go to the first question about hunt and poop.
Yeah.
Was that part of this?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. That was probably the part of this that I was least involved with, to be honest. But we, went into this thinking that I think like a lot of people, we were going to find a lot of human samples. So we're really glad that we, actually tested that assumption using human mitochondrial DNA testing. But we, yeah, I think we expected, quite a few of them to be human. And actually we were attempting to, rule out samples that were certainly animal because we were more interested in assessing the human pathogens. So like if, the collector saw a dog like actively defecating, that sample was not collected. But yeah, so it was 20 blocks that were sampled, and a perimeter was set around those blocks, and any stool within those was considered fair game for sampling. Kind of after the fact, we looked at the 311 reports and looked at the GPS data and went to make sure that like that, these GPS coordinates that people are reporting are they actually correspond to a fecal sample. In terms of, identifying like, where people are defecating, I think Heather Amato's actually done some work on that to
That could be a great offline conversation, but if you finding poop is hard too. Finding the poop you want, so that's not so bad if you think about it kind of after research. So I it's to be commended that in there 20%, 1 in 5, that's still a lot. Defecation on the streets, think of it that way. So
it is.
talk
And
it down, talk it up. The other, the question I had there about showcasing how we can move sanitation forward, I don't know if these individual areas that I'm not familiar with the San Francisco ones, if they're waterless, if they're the equivalent of what we call porta potties, or if they're hooked up to the public system. But it could be an education factor into this across our community system.
yeah, I think a priority for these was also, providing a safe space for people to use the bathroom. People experiencing homelessness often, find unsafe traveling conditions to find a bathroom half a mile away or further, and also reducing the risk of infection within the bathroom. So I want to say these toilets are self-cleaning, but I should.
Okay. Mhm. And for our international colleagues, 311 is the phone system that's designed just to report all sorts of things in a lot of communities around the US. Clarification, thanks.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Were there any other?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not totally sure I can fully answer that question as well as maybe one of my other colleagues, but I yeah, I think I would have to go back to that original paper and see what yeah, what was ruled out for other explanations. I can go back to that quickly. Let's see. Yeah, sorry, I wish I included more information on that original paper. Thanks, Heather. Thank you.
One of the kind of sour points that you have got. Dogs are really good at.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that, of the 4 out of 5 samples that were presumptively animal in origin, there wasn't like a higher, pathogen profile of what we might see in stray dogs. We only found we only had one hit on a helminth target in this out of all of those samples. So I mean, you would think that if these were like dogs that, or whatever animal it might be, we can't really say that we're not receiving regular vet attention. It might be something to look into about what's like how many helminths how many of those we might expect to have helminths, because I kind of suspect it might be higher if all those animals were not receiving regular vet care. So they definitely could be people, house people not picking up their animal stools.
Perfect. Let's thank Troy.
Thank you.
You can leave. You like. Move away. If you leave the question, well thought out answer. So when are you?
Yeah, I'm actually driving. So hopefully, might be getting a for hopefully